A frequent question archaeologists get asked is, what else is there left to find? Surely we've already got most of the past figured out, right? And while we do know a lot, more than even most people realize, that doesn't mean we know it all. There are certainly gaps in our understanding, pockets where whole societies lived and died and are barely noticed by modern audiences. One such example is Nuhašše, a land, or is it a kingdom, that thrived in the Middle and Late Bronze Ages in southern Syria. It played an important role in the geopolitics of the ancient Near East, but is largely forgotten, even by scholars who study this period. So, what do we know about Nuhašše? Let's dig in. Syria weathered the intermediate Bronze Age better than her neighbors. While most of the Near East had a period of deurbanization, the Orontes River and the Euphrates River both supported several urban centers which were poised to dominate the landscape during the Middle and Late Bronze Ages. On the Euphrates, cities like Mari, Imar, Ashtata, and Carchemish were influential polities. On the Orontes, Khantna emerged as an early power, but cities on the river or its floodplain also prospered, like Kadesh, Tunip, Nia, Ugarit, and Alalak. Between these two rivers lies the so-called Aleppo Plateau. Far to the north are the Taurus Mountains, and on the south are the Palmyra Mountains, which protect it from the Badia al-Sham, or the Syrian desert. This area is surprisingly fertile. Through it flows the Kuwait River, there are marshes and fertile plains, and much of the area falls within the 200mm ICET, meaning the arable land can be used for dry farming. That is, rainfall can sustain agriculture here without the need for irrigation. The land is also suitable for pastoralists, moving herds from pasturage to pasturage. Perhaps for these reasons, during the Middle and Late Bronze Age, this area was called the Nuhašše lands. Nuhašše is a Semitic term that means blessed or prosperous. The term was used both for the land between the Euphrates and Orontes rivers, as well as for the socio-political entities that formed there. In the 18th century, the land of Nuhašše is mentioned in tablets from Mari, where it refers to the region. The same is the case for the 17th century in tablets from Alalak. At this time, in the Middle Bronze Age, Nuhašše was apparently divided between the polities of Khantna, which claimed the southern portions of the region, and Yamhad, a polity centered at Halab or Aleppo, which claimed the north. It changes in the Late Bronze Age, however, as we see the first known king of Nuhašše in the 15th century. It's not clear how the people of Nuhašše were organized, but based on tablets from Imar and later Hittite sources, the evidence points towards the area being composed of multiple different polities, as the Hittites in particular note kings of Nuhašše. It's not clear what that entails, if there were multiple petty kingdoms or other territorially based principalities, or if the kings refer to tribal or even clan leadership composed of local sheikhs or other kinship-based nobility. Whatever the case, it seems there was no real king of Nuhašše until Thutmose III made one. In his 7th, 8th, and 10th campaigns, the pharaoh campaigned against Mitanni and Syria. Nuhašše was a strategically important region for the pharaoh as it bridged the Orontes River network of cities and the Euphrates. So as he moved through Syria, he conquered the region of Nuhašše, taking thousands captive, and he appointed a king, a man named Tekuwa. In celebration, Thutmose participated in an elephant hunt either in the western regions of Nuhašše or in the neighboring polity of Nia, as a show of pharaonic force in the region. But while Thutmose believed he was stabilizing Nuhašše by appointing a loyal vassal who could resist his rival in Mitanni, he was mistaken. During the course of the 14th century, Mitanni had assumed control over most of inland Syria, including Nuhašše. And by the death of Amenhotep III, the Orontes River had become a quasi-permanent border between Egypt and Mitanni, leaving Nuhašše decidedly outside of Egypt's geopolitical orbit. And it seemed it would remain a marginal region on the border of the desert with no real regional importance. But this wasn't to be. Because around 1350 BC, Nuhašše entered the larger geopolitical world in a large way. But the details are quite a bit murky, and they revolve around the identities of a man named Sharupshi and a man named Adad-Nirari or Adu-Nirari. Both men are attested as kings of Nuhašše in places like the Amarna letters, in Hittite vassal treaties, and in a juridical letter from Khantna. However, their identities and who follows who is not clear. In fact, one viable explanation is that Sharupshi is the Hurrian name, used when dealing with the Hurrian-speaking kingdom of Mitanni, and Adad-Nirari is the Semitic name used when dealing with speakers of Semitic languages, and the two are in fact the same person. It's perhaps best to discuss what we know about each of them from the textual sources, and then try to draw some conclusions about the two's relationship. According to Hittite sources, Sharupshi was king of Nuhašše and subject to Mitanni, but he switched allegiance to the king of the Hittites. When the Mitannians retaliated, he appealed to the Hittites for aid. A later Hittite treaty records the events.
When the king of the land of Mitanni plotted to kill Sharupshi, thereupon the king of the land of Mitanni, along with his elite troops and his chariots, invaded the land of Nuhašše. And when he had attacked it, thereupon Sharupshi sent his messenger to the king of the land of Hatti, I am the servant of the king of the land of Hatti. Rescue me now. And I, my son, sent warriors and horse to his support. And they drove out the king of the land of Mitanni, along with his troops and his chariots from the land of Nuhašše.
This call for aid ostensibly created the necessary pretext for Shuppiluliuma's so-called one-year war. As the treaty records, the Hittites forced the king of Mitanni to flee not only the land of Nuhašše, but also much of Mitanni. Sometime during this war, though, Sharupshi switched allegiance back to Mitanni. Consequently, Shuppiluliuma crossed the Euphrates and subjected all of Syria, except Carchemish, to Hittite suzerainty, including Nuhašše. The king of Byblos, Reb-Hada, reported these events to Egypt, stating,
May the king be informed that the king of Hatti has seized all the countries that were vassals of the king of Mitanni. Behold, he is king of Narima and the land of the great kings.
Meanwhile, there's the figure of Adad-Nirari. He's attested in the Amarna letters and an Ugaritic vassal treaty with the Hittites. As a quick aside, there was a king of Khantna named Adad-Nirari, but it's not clear the relationship between him and the king of Nuhašše. Though unlikely, it is possible the two were the same, indicating Adad-Nirari ruled over a substantial swath of inland Syria. However, it's more likely that the two were not the same and not even contemporaries. The Adad-Nirari of Nuhašše is noted for his fierce opposition to the Hittites. He even wrote to the pharaoh to get his assistance against the Hittites. He cites the precedent of Thutmose III as the Egyptians' prerogative to appoint a king over the region.
Message of Adad-Nirari, your servant. I fall at the feet of my lord. Note that when Manapia, the king of Egypt, your ancestor, made Taku, my ancestor, a king in Nuhašše, he put oil on his head and spoke as follows, whom the king of Egypt has made a king, and on whose head he has put oil. And the king of Hatti wrote to me about an alliance. My lord, I rejected the offer of tablets of treaty obligations, and I am still a servant of the king of Egypt. And may our lord come forth this year. Do not be negligent. You will see that they are loyal to the service of the king, my lord.
Adad-Nirari did not wait for the pharaoh, though, and took matters into his own hands. He formed alliances with Nia and Mukish, and this coalition attacked the city-state of Ugarit on the Syrian coast. But the Ugaritic king Nikmadu II appealed to Shuppiluliuma for assistance. In Nikmadu's vassal treaty, the details of the war are cited.
When Itur-Adu, king of the land of Mukish, Adu-Nirari, king of the land of Nuhašše, and Akiteshup, king of Nia, were hostile to the authority of His Majesty, the great king, their lord, assembled their troops, captured cities in the interior of the land of Ugarit, oppressed the land of Ugarit, carried off subjects of Nikmadu, king of the land of Ugarit, as civilian captives, and devastated the land of Ugarit.
But Shuppiluliuma eagerly accepted Ugarit as a vassal and drove off the forces of Mukish, Nia, and Nuhašše. The Hittite king attacked Nuhašše and deposed the king. So, what was the relationship between Adad-Nirari and Sharupshi? Several explanations have been offered, but each has weaknesses. First is the aforementioned option that they are the same person with different names. Second option is Adad-Nirari came first, was defeated by the Hittites at the request of Ugarit, and then Sharupshi was installed as a loyal Hittite vassal who was subsequently attacked by Mitanni. This seems unlikely as it is difficult to reconcile with some of the Hittite vassal treaties. Another option is Sharupshi was first, and after he switched allegiance to the Hittites, the Mitannians killed him, leading to Adad-Nirari, the anti-Hittite king, to be placed on the throne by the Mitannians. Still another option is that Adad-Nirari temporarily deposed Sharupshi before Sharupshi in turn deposed Adad-Nirari. A final option is that they were contemporary and that Nuhašše was more politically fragmented than the sources available tend to indicate. A tantalizing clue comes from an Amarna letter written by the Amorite king Aziru. Written at a time when he was still nominally loyal to Egypt but courting vassal status with the Hittites, Aziru claims,
"The king, my lord, has spoken about the building of Sumur. The kings of Nuhašše have been at war with me and have taken my cities at the instruction of Hatip. So I have not built it. Now, in all haste, I am going to build it."
The key element here is kings of Nuhašše, written at a time contemporary with Adad-Nirari. Aziru himself signed a treaty with Niqmepa II of Ugrit, promising military aid should Ugrit ever need it, and a plurality of contemporary kings of Nuhašše seems to be the easiest explanation to reconcile with the various data available. Given the sources we have, we may never know the relationship between Adad-Nirari and Sharupshi. The sources we have which could tell us are fragmentary. Other sources are biased, and we should be wary of accepting them at face value. Whatever the relationship, it is clear that Shuppiluliuma replaced the king of Nuhašše with a loyal vassal named Tette. He was apparently the grandson of Sharupshi. Tette apparently saw Nuhašše's border shrink in the aftermath of Shuppiluliuma's subsequent Syrian campaigns. Nuhašše had surely not done anything to ingratiate itself to the Hittite king, so after Carchemish was conquered by the Hittites, territory from the surrounding regions was granted to the new king of Carchemish, including territory from Nuhašše. So Nuhašše had no love for the Hittites. So when Shuppiluliuma died in 1322 and a plague ravaged Anatolia, Tette and Nuhašše led a small coalition in rebellion. The Hittite viceroy of Syria, the king of Carchemish, secretly negotiated with Tette's brother, Shumatara. If he would depose his brother and either kill or imprison him, the new Hittite king would recognize Shumatara as vassal and rightful king of Nuhašše. The coup was executed successfully and Tette was imprisoned. However, the Hittite king never demanded the prisoner, nor did he collect him when he campaigned in Syria. Consequently, Tette was able to stage a counter-coup. Shumatara was himself deposed and Tette led a second rebellion. This rebellion, though, had international support. An Egyptian army arrived to support Nuhašše, and a military response from the Hittites was necessary. But the Hittites emerged victorious, but this again was only temporary. Only a few years later, Nuhašše rose in rebellion again. This led to a cascade of events where Kadesh rebelled, Assyria invaded and seized the Hittites' most important Syrian stronghold of Carchemish, and the Hittite king sent a general named Karunta to campaign in Syria while he himself marched for the Euphrates. Karunta crushed the rebellion. The king of Kadesh was killed, and the region of Nuhašše was ravaged. No more kings of Nuhašše are known to history. Tette is the last one. The land appears sporadically in the sources of the 13th century, but it was not a kingdom anymore, but a region under the direct administration of Carchemish. In the first quarter of the 13th century, Nuhašše was chosen as a place of exile for a deposed Hittite king. It is listed as supporting the Hittites at the Battle of Kadesh against Ramses the Great. But for the most part, after Tette, Nuhašše began its slow descent into oblivion. By the Iron Age, the name Nuhašše was long gone, and the region was called variously Luash or Lukuti, and was subservient to the Aramean polity of Hamat. So why study Nuhašše? What is there that's worth learning about? Maybe not much. Nuhašše was a minor kingdom, and never achieved the same level of greatness as its neighbors. It never had the same territorial control as Khantna. It never had the same political influence as Carchemish. It never had the economy of Ugrit. It never had as ferocious fighters as Amurru. It was only ever mediocre. But even in its mediocrity, Nuhašše's story matters. It survived in a region dominated by empires, holding its own while navigating the pressures of larger, more powerful neighbors. Its significance lies not in grand achievements, but in its ability to endure, to forge an identity amidst uncertainty. Studying Nuhašše reminds us that history isn't only about the dominant forces. It's about the smaller voices, the forgotten kingdoms, and the people who lived in the spaces in between.